100 tons of bananas, dumped into the burning desert, sands of Burkina, Faso. Cameras captured trucks, unloading them. People watching in disbelief. Why would a president bury food that could feed thousands? Was it madness? Or was it a message that the world was not ready to hear? Today we uncover the shocking truth behind Ibrahim Traoré's mysterious act. The news spread like wildfire across Burkina Faso. Long convoys of trucks, loaded with fresh bananas, drove deep into the desert. One by one, workers began unloading them, spilling hundreds of bunches into the burning sand. The golden fruit, once a symbol of nourishment, now looked abandoned and lifeless under the sun. Villagers whispered among themselves, some shocked, others outraged. Why would a leader waste so much food? Farmers who had spent months under the scorching heat growing those bananas felt a sting of disbelief. Even international media began asking, was this the decision of a careless leader or the strategy of a visionary? For days, the images of bananas buried in the desert went viral. Some called it madness, others called it arrogance. But in truth, what happened that day carried a meaning far greater than anyone first imagined. To understand why Ibrahim Traoré buried those bananas, we must go back to the deeper struggles of Burkina Faso. For decades, this small, West African nation has been caught in a silent war, not always fought with guns and bombs, but with economics, trade, and control. Foreign corporations, backed by powerful nations, dug deep into the soil for gold, drained its land for cotton, and even manipulated its food supply. What should have been a blessing for the people became a chain around their necks. Bananas in particular tell this painful story. Farmers would toil day and night, under the scorching African sun, just to harvest crops. Yet when it came time to sell, they were forced into unfair deals. Middlemen dictated prices so low that the farmers barely survived. The real profit went overseas and into the pockets of those who had never touched the soil, never watered a tree, never felt the sweat of labor. To the world, bananas were just fruit. To the people of Burkina Faso, they had become a symbol of humiliation, proof that their hard work could be stolen, cheapened, and sold without dignity. And to Ibrahim Traoré, this was unacceptable. So when he ordered those 100 tons to be buried, he wasn't just throwing away food. He was striking at the very heart of exploitation. He was saying, if you will not respect the fruit of our labor, we would rather bury it than let you profit from it. This act was not about waste. It was about resistance, and soon the world would realize the message behind it. At first glance, the world saw waste. They saw thousands of bananas lying under the scorching sun, left to rot in the desert sands. But Ibrahim Traoré saw something very different. For him, those bananas were not food anymore, they were weapons. Weapons used by outsiders to keep Burkina Faso's farmers trapped in endless poverty. For years, cheap imports and unfair contracts forced local growers into desperation. They could not compete with the prices set by international corporations. And so the very fruit they worked to produce had become a chain that tied them down. By burying 100 tons of bananas, Traoré was sending a dangerous, unforgettable message. Burkina Faso will no longer play by rules written in foreign capitals. This was not about destroying food, but about destroying control. He wanted the world to see that Africans will no longer allow their resources to be stolen, underpriced, and used against them. He wanted every farmer in his nation to know, your work has value, your sweat has dignity, and your harvest will no longer be treated as cheap trade for outsiders. In that single act, Ibrahim Traoré turned fruit into fire. What seemed like madness was, in fact, a bold act of defiance, a rebellion not against bananas, but against a broken system designed to keep his people weak. When the footage of Ibrahim Traoré burying bananas reached the world, critics rushed to call it foolish, even reckless. But beneath the surface, this act carried a message louder than any speech he had ever delivered. This was not about fruit. This was about freedom. For decades, Burkina Faso, like many African nations, had been trapped in a silent war. Not a war fought with guns and bombs, but with contracts, trade deals, and hidden strings. Imported goods flooding African markets, local farmers forced to sell at impossible prices, and multinational corporations dictating who wins and who loses. It was economic slavery disguised as business. By burying those bananas, Traoré shattered the illusion. He wanted the people of his nation to see the truth with their own eyes. If we keep playing by their rules, we will never be free. His message was simple yet revolutionary. Africa does not need charity. It needs sovereignty. He was telling the world that Burkina Faso would no longer bow down to markets controlled in Paris, London, or Washington. Every ton of bananas buried was a warning shot aimed not at his own farmers, but at the global powers who had long manipulated African trade. It was as if he was declaring, "We will waste 100 tons today if it means saving 1 million tomorrow. We will sacrifice fruit today if it means securing dignity for generations to come." For the people, this act turned Traoré into more than a president. He became a symbol, a leader willing to shock the world to awaken his nation. Some called him reckless, others called him brilliant. But one thing was certain, the message had been delivered. And that message was not just for Burkina Faso. It was for Africa, for every farmer in Mali, every trader in Niger, every worker in Ghana who had long suffered under unfair systems. Traoré was saying to them, "Rise, open your eyes. You are not weak. You are not dependent. You hold power, and it is time to claim it." This was the true essence of his political strike. He buried bananas, but what he unearthed was something far greater, the spirit of resistance. The images spread like wildfire. Within hours, international media channels picked up the story. President buries 100 tons of bananas in the desert. Headlines flashed across Paris, London, Washington, and New York. Some laughed. Some were outraged, and some were deeply unsettled. To the Western press, it was easy to mock. Commentators called it a publicity stunt, a waste, an act of desperation. But behind closed doors, policymakers were not laughing. They recognized the danger, not of the bananas themselves, but of the symbolism. Because if one African leader could send such a bold message, others might follow. In Paris, analysts worried, what if Burkina Faso inspires Mali? What if Niger joins? What if this sparks a domino effect across West Africa? These weren't just questions. They were fears. Meanwhile, across Africa, the reaction was electric. In small villages and crowded cities, people whispered about the bananas in the desert. Farmers who had long felt invisible suddenly saw their struggles broadcast to the world. Youth groups shared clips online, calling Traoré a leader who dared to break the silence. Some called it madness, others called it genius, but no one ignored it. In neighboring countries, ordinary citizens began asking dangerous questions. Why are our leaders silent? Why do we keep exporting resources while our people starve? Why do we beg for aid while foreign companies take our wealth? Even outside Africa, activists and thinkers started to connect the dots. Environmentalists saw a statement about sustainability. Economists saw a challenge to global trade hierarchies. And ordinary people, far from the deserts of Burkina Faso, began to see Traoré not as a radical, but as a rebel standing against a rigged system. For the elites of the West, this was troubling, because ideas spread faster than goods, and Traoré's act was not just an economic decision. It was an idea, a seed planted in the minds of millions. One photo of a desert, one image of bananas covered in sand, had turned into a global conversation. A single act in Burkina Faso had shaken boardrooms in Europe, raised debates in Africa, and forced the world to pay attention. This was the power of symbolism. And in this global storm, Traoré's voice grew louder than ever before. But here's the question that kept everyone restless. Why? Why would a leader bury 100 tons of bananas in the middle of the desert? Was it really just a message to the West? Or was there something more? Behind the scenes, whispers began to spread. Some insiders claimed the bananas weren't just food. They were a test shipment from foreign corporations, part of a deal that would have locked Burkina Faso's farmers into an exploitative contract for decades. Traoré, they said, had refused to sign, and instead of quietly returning the shipment, he made a statement the whole world could see. Others argued it was about dignity. For years, Burkina Faso had been forced to sell crops at prices set by outsiders, prices so low that farmers barely survived. The bananas in the desert symbolized this injustice. By burying them, Traoré wasn't wasting food. He was burying the chains of economic slavery. Then came an even more startling theory. Some believed the bananas were genetically modified, designed not to feed people, but to control agriculture. If true, accepting them would have meant giving away the future of Burkina Faso's food security to foreign labs. For Traoré, that was unacceptable. Better to bury the entire shipment than let his people's independence rot in the hands of outsiders. But perhaps the most powerful truth was simpler. Traoré wanted his people to wake up. He wanted them to see that their wealth, their land, and their food were worth more than the crumbs offered by global powers. By making the act so dramatic and so unforgettable, he forced not just his country, but the entire continent to ask, who really controls Africa's future? In the desert sands, covered under 100 tons of wasted bananas, lay a silent revolution. It wasn't about the fruit. It was about power, about freedom, about a leader willing to risk ridicule and outrage just to remind his people. We are not slaves to anyone, and as the world debated, analyzed, and speculated, one thing became clear. Ibrahim Traoré had turned a pile of bananas into a weapon more powerful than bullets, and a story that would echo across history. In the end, it wasn't about bananas, the desert, or even the headlines. It was about courage, about a leader daring to break the rules of a game designed to keep Africa weak. Ibrahim Traoré knew people would laugh. He knew the world would call it madness. But he also knew one simple truth. Sometimes, the boldest actions are the ones that cannot be ignored. By burying 100 tons of bananas, he planted something far more powerful than crops, and he planted an idea. An idea that Africa could stand tall, reject humiliation, and choose dignity over dependence. And maybe that's why this story still matters. Because it forces us to ask ourselves, if one man in Burkina Faso can shake the world with bananas, what else is possible if millions rise together? History is full of small acts that changed everything. This might just be one of them. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think Traoré's decision was madness? Or was it genius? Was it waste? Or was it freedom? Tell me in the comments below, because your voice is part of this story too. And if you believe more people should hear stories that the mainstream won't tell, then hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more untold truths. Because this is not just about the past, it's about the future we're all a part of.